So the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, was assassinated recently. This isn't just any politician in Japan. He is actually the longest-serving Prime Minister in Japan's history and shaped much of the politics of the country in the last 10 years. This is fairly shocking considering that there's very little violence in Japan. Part of this is due to the very strict gun laws they have there, and the fact that they're an island, so they don't have any borders where guns can easily be smuggled across. But this event shows you don't need a gun to commit violence, as he basically made his own out of pipes and other materials he found. And initially you would think this is about politics because you're assassinating a former prime minister, but apparently the reason the suspect said he shot him is because his mother was bankrupted by a religious organization called the Unification Church. From what I've seen, this group is kind of like a televangelist organization led by someone who was claiming to be a messiah. It was largely a Korean religious organization, but then spread outward from there. The shooter believed that Abe was connected to this group because an opposition party called the NHK Party accused Abe of being affiliated with this organization. From what I've seen, there's little evidence he was affiliated with them at all. The Unification Church is widely known as a cult, so accusing a former prime minister of being linked to them is a major accusation. The NHK is a fairly niche party in Japan, so the accusations weren't really taken seriously. The suspect said he initially wanted to kill a leader within the cult, but then decided to kill Shinzo Abe instead when he learned about the accusations against him. This is a fairly odd decision because if you wanted to harm the church, killing a leader of it would probably have a lot more of an impact than killing someone with very spurious links to it. And it's not unheard of for a suspect to conceal their true motives to hide their own affiliations. Directly after the shooting, many were speculating that this might be a communist supporter who wanted to kill Shinzo Abe because he's well known for being a strident anti-communist. And if you were thinking from the suspect's perspective, if it got out there that he was a supporter of communism, there would be major blowback against that group. It also likely lead to some conflict with China, considering that they're communist, and there would be accusations that they were partially responsible for this. But then you would have to take into consideration why a communist would want to kill Shinzo Abe, considering that he was out of office at the time, and he was pretty much retired from politics. Sure, he still had some influence in his party, but killing him just made him a martyr for his cause. This became very clear only 2 days later when his party, the LDP, won a major victory in the elections for parliament. On top of this, the current LDP leader and Prime Minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida, is known as a moderate and did not want to change the pacifist constitution. But after his election victory, he promised to change the pacifist constitution to achieve rearmament for Japan. And due to their significant gains in the parliament in this election, he actually has the votes to do so. So in a way, Shinzo Abe's death may have been the final catalyst they needed to achieve his ultimate goal of rearmament. Meaning if you opposed his agenda, this is probably the worst thing you could have done. On the flip side to that, you may argue that the LDP was already set to win this number of seats, and that Kishida was already moving in the direction of rearmament due to China's more aggressive actions recently. He might have been a little slower if Abe wasn't assassinated, but he would have gotten to the same position in time regardless. In this situation, killing Shinzo Abe would just be a form of accelerationism. With all of that said, this side of the argument is fairly speculative. Some have argued that this assassination is a Franz Ferdinand moment, where it leads to conflict in the region that later spreads to the rest of the world. I personally don't see that. That is a very extreme scenario that I think would require a bit more than just a single assassination. Of course, people might have said that about Franz Ferdinand, but there were a lot of other factors going on at the time. I would compare this more to the JFK assassination, where people have theories on the motivations behind it and how it took place for many generations to come. And much like with JFK, I think Shinzo Abe's assassination will lead to much tighter security in the country. It's very clear that the security failed on many levels here. In fact, the head of the Nara Prefectural Police has said that it's undeniable that there were problems with the security. I don't want to show any of the footage here because YouTube's gonna YouTube. And it's not even that particularly graphic, but they're putting restrictions on it anyway, so. But I think I can use a picture, so here's Shinzo Abe giving his speech right before he died. This is actually right in between the two shots. It appears the first shot actually missed because Abe continues to stand there, not knowing that there's any danger. You can't see it from this angle, but in other videos, the gunman's off to the side over here, off the screen, and there is a guard that is trying to physically block him from getting any closer to the scene. It seems like he thought he was a cameraman or something trying to get close, as he didn't even try to tackle him. But right after the second shot goes off, they go directly for him and take him down. There is also a security guard, I think one of these guys, who comes over to about here and pulls up a suitcase to try to block the gunshot. And while it appears that the suitcase took some of the shot, it looks like the security guard overshot his angle a bit and was too far to the left, allowing the gunman to shoot Abe from the right, into the neck and back. Regardless of what they thought it was, if there's a large bang, these security guards clearly should have gotten Abe off the stand and covered him immediately. I should note that there was about 3 full seconds in between the two shots, which is ample time to react in the situation. There's also the fact that none of the security guards seem to have been facing the opposite direction behind where he was giving his speech. If there were, they could have seen what was happening immediately and stopped the attack much sooner. Overall, it definitely looks like the security is going to need better training moving forward. And this will certainly change the security culture in Japan overall, and important people and places will have tighter security with screening beforehand. The interesting question is how they will deal with these political speeches on the streets, as that is very much ingrained into the culture of Japanese politics. Perhaps they might just accept a certain level of insecurity, or maybe they will choose more strategically defendable locations, as much as you can in the open like this. It'd also be a good idea to arm the security guards so they can more easily deal with armed assailants. This would be a significant psychological shift because the Japanese don't have any signs of militarism in their everyday lives, and this would change that. But it will be interesting to see how they adapt, and how much of an impact this will have on the culture. One last thing I want to touch on before ending this video is Shinzo Abe's legacy. You have a lot of people, specifically in the West, who are arguing that he was a terrible person because he refused to acknowledge Japanese war crimes during World War II. They also don't like the fact that he defended his grandfather, who was convicted of war crimes after the war. But the thing is, honor is an extremely important thing in Japanese culture and much of East Asian culture in general. Because of this, you can't really expect him to shame his own family or his own people by saying how terrible they were in the past. It's also extremely unhealthy for a people to be ashamed of their history and heritage. Doing so ultimately destroys their culture and harms their sense of self-respect. But then people might argue that it would be a bad thing for them to forget their war crimes, because then they might do it in the future. The problem is, if you deny something that someone you like is accused of doing, that probably means you think that thing that they're accused of doing is a bad thing. Meaning, even if they don't believe that they committed the war crimes, they still believe that war crimes are bad. So they might not have an entirely accurate view of history, but as we all know, the winners write the history books, and there's a lot of things that America and the West don't accept about their history. Aside from this complaint, he's well known for being a liberal nationalist, or as it's more commonly known as, civic nationalism. He was focused on revitalizing the economy after the lost decades of the 1990s and 2000s. He did this through his signature Abenomics, which was basically strategic spending in the economy. He was also instrumental in the formation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, and later when Trump pulled out of the agreement, he helped form the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is basically the successor to that agreement without the Americans involved. He also worked well with presidents of both parties in America, meeting with 4 of the last presidents. He ultimately had more of a technocratic statesman approach to politics than anything ideological. The right in Japan were particularly unhappy with a provision in the TPP that would lead to massive immigration of unskilled foreign workers. So ultimately, Shinzo Abe's legacy is a mixed bag for both the left and the right, as he did things that both the right would agree with, but also did things that the left would agree with at times as well. But regardless, this is a tragic event that will have major implications for the country. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments. Do you believe the official story on the suspect's motives? How do you think things will change in the country? And what do you think of Shinzo Abe's legacy? Thank you all very much for watching, and have a nice day.